Hi there. My name's Benjamin Mutton, and I'm a ClickHouse consultant. And I spend a lot of time on, looking at performance issues, performance optimization in ClickHouse clusters. I've developed this tool called QueryDog, which is a UI for kind of understanding and visualizing the performance of your ClickHouse cluster in a way which helps you diagnose performance issues or generally improve the performance of your ClickHouse deployment. On this first screen here, this is all built around a table called system.QueryLog, and this basically gives us a visualization of what is happening in terms of inserts and deletes in the cluster. So if I just refresh briefly. At the top here we can look across different time windows, so if I want to look back across the previous hour or the previous 6 hours, I can do so. I'll focus in on an hour for the purposes of this demo. I can also tweak and look at individual time periods, so specific time periods. So if I want to look at what happened yesterday between 5 and 6 p.m, I can wind the clock back here. We have different visualizations, so I've got bar charts and line charts or stacked line charts, and what these do is they break it down between selects, inserts, deletes and others, so I can get a feel for what is happening in the instance. I can also book it by different time windows, so if I'm looking over kind of a longer period, I can book it by hour and say what happened in the last 6 hours, and we can see we've had 17,000 insert statements on this instance. With other kind of cases, maybe you're down at the sub-second level and I want to know how many inserts are we inserting, are we carrying out per second and stuff like that. On this same panel, I can take a lens like what is the average duration of the queries, or what is the minimum duration and the maximum duration. So I can see here that in this particular hour we had one which took 450 milliseconds. I can look at memory usage over time. Let me change that back to a line chart. I can look at read rows and written rows and result rows. Some of these lines are quite flat because it's just a synthetic data set. I've just got a generator running in the background. Down here we have a list of all of the queries which have taken place within the instance. I can order by things like the duration of the query to find the slowest queries. I can look at by read rows and written rows to understand what is producing the most I/O, and we can also order by memory usage to find our most memory intensive queries. I can toggle on various fields, so by default we kind of choose the most common and useful columns, but in almost all of the views in QueryDog we can filter down and add additional columns if necessary. And if we click on these icons, then we can drill down into a specific query. We can see what was executed, get the key metrics, and also surface these profile events. So this can tell us what's happening in terms of I/O, CPU contention, network transfer, how many rows we're reading as part of joins, etc. So this stuff is really useful and it's a little bit underused, and one thing I wanted to do was surface that here. On the group tab, what we do is we group similar queries. So if we've had exactly the same query, if I click on here, we can see how many times have we run it, what was the longest execution time, what was the fastest execution time, and the average. And then what I can do is I can break those out and look at the 100 instances of this query execution to look at the individual instances. I mentioned the profile events. These are super useful. So what we do here is we break them out of the array on the system query log, and we can get specific details about, CPU contention, something I'm looking at a lot, what's happening in terms of network I/O, and pull out the outliers. And this is quite a low level analysis, but it's very useful for performance issues. Here we kind of pivot the query log by table, so I can see which table is having the most activity. So here it's e-commerce page views, 50 queries, the average query, the memory and stuff like that. So if I'm looking at a ClickHouse instance for the first time, it's interesting to know, where in the database is the activity. The views log, so this is all about the materialized views. So each time a materialized view is executed, you can look at how long it's taken, how much data has it read and written, and memory usage. And I find a lot of my projects are about materialized view optimization, and this is a really useful table. I think it's called query views log or query view logs, something like that. Surface that information and understand what is happening in your materialized views. And then finally, I have this histograms. This shows up in a few areas of the apps, and this is like visual breakdowns of what is happening. So here I can see, again, page views is our most active table. What is the most active database for most active queries, users, and stuff like that. And as I change these windows, then the histograms also update. So everything's linked, basically. So yeah, I think that's mostly it for this home screen. I'll point out here as well that I can configure multiple databases within this instance. So if you click on this icon here, you can select between like maybe a development, test and prod environment, or I have different customer environments, and you can move between those quite rapidly, which can be quite useful. Moving on to some of the other areas, so objects. So this is basically a view of things like your databases, your tables, your views, your dictionaries and stuff like that. So I can understand within tables, how many partitions do we have, how many parts are within those partitions, what is happening with the merge activity, with compression and all of that good stuff. So this is partitions, how many rows are in each partition. These are the parts. Projections are obviously a very important feature for optimizing performance. Indexes, so what type of indexes do we have? And again, more histograms. Now all of this information is available in ClickHouse system tables, and it's obviously easier to work with rather than a query log, but I just think there's something about having it all available visually and having it all interlinked. So for instance, if I was to click on a table, and if I find my e-commerce tables, and if I click on the orders table, and then I can go and, if I go to my e-commerce orders table again, then I'll see only the partitions which pertain to the orders table. Again, we have these drill downs, so I've clicked on the drill down for a specific partition and I can understand the parts which are in play. So it has these kind of interlinkages as you have a theory about why something is running slowly or performing badly, and you can trace through the system and quickly understand what might be happening. The next area is a part log. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but ClickHouse is based on a system of parts, and these parts get merged over time. And there's an important table which shows, how they're being merged, when they're being merged, are we creating new parts, and things like that. When are we removing them? Becomes interesting in a distributed situation where I have a cluster. So this screen basically allows us to drill down on the part log and look at problems like, are we creating too many parts? Do we have merge contention? Things like that. So I find myself spending a lot of time in this screen. We can see we have a lot of remove part operations. Activity, so this is looking at the kind of live tables. So there are a number of tables in ClickHouse which tell you what is happening now. And an example might be system processes. So I can see processes which are running at this time. So I can say right now, how long have these queries, been running? This one's been running for, is that 1 millisecond, etc. How much memory are we using? Then in terms of mergers, I can say, do we have any live mergers at the moment? That's system mergers. Mutations, you have system mutations, and that's again giving you a live view of what's happening in the database. View refreshes, so this is about refreshable materialized views. You get a view as to when they're running, when was the last one, stuff like that. ClickHouse query cache, something I use a lot for improving performance, DDL queues and async inserts. So this is about like a view of what is happening in the database at this moment rather than historical stuff. If I go to instance, so this is surfacing historical metrics, so total query time in microseconds, total inserts, failed selects, stuff like that. So the ClickHouse server exposes similar dashboards, but I've kind of tweaked these to suit my workflow and the type of things I look at. I've also bucketed them into different groups. So this dashboard is all about merge activity, this is about memory usage, this is I/O, this is the different thread pools. So this is really interesting in a contention situation where maybe I've got too many mergers and it's leading to contention on my selects or my inserts. So I can get an understand of, what are the pools set to? Are we capping out? Do we have contention around access to CPU cores? And then a bunch of stuff about caches, like mark caches and index caches. So you're getting quite low level here, but every project's different, Sometimes their performance is about contention, the server's not big enough. Sometimes it is caching, sometimes it's data structures, indexes. And you never really know where you're going to have to focus, so we try to hit all areas here. The text log, so ClickHouse has a system text log. You can go and look at that log file, or you can look at it via ClickHouse. So I've surfaced it through the application. I break out errors and warnings specifically. So a new instance, probably the first thing you should go and do is look for errors in the log file and look at system.errors and system.warnings. And this is probably the first screen I'll go to just to understand if there are any error conditions in the application. Then users is all about the users, the grants, the roles, the role-based access control, the row policies. This is more kind of like a report of what's in the database. It's not particularly useful. There aren't a lot of filters or anything on there at the moment. Cluster, I don't think this is going to show as much because I'm operating against a single instance of ClickHouse here. But yeah, so this is one replica, one shard, but we can look at all of that configuration. We can look at what is happening in the replication queues, if we've executed distributed DDL across the cluster, and we can look at the state of our Zookeeper cluster. So this can be really useful. It saves you having to log on to like 5 different servers and looking at the state of a cluster and different log files and understanding the performance of the data integration. I'm going to come back to micros in a moment and just close off a few of these. So browse, this is like a visual viewer of the database. So I can look at the databases, and these are the different databases which I've created. And then in there we can see the tables and then the columns and the partitions. So this is a kind of UI for exploring the objects in the database, including the users. We also have this graph view, so I can say users, queried, let's go via the databases, probably a bit better, and then this one, what are the tables? And again, being a kind of performance optimization tool, I'm kind of looking at the columns and the partitions and stuff like that. So that can be very useful. We also have an integrated kind of query runner in here as well. So if I go back to one of my queries, and And let me find a select query. So if I go in here, just so I've got a query to work with, and I'm going to press Analyze, that has dropped it into the embedded query editor. And if I run the query, I can get the results. So I can see here, this one took 26 milliseconds and 361 rows. And I can also explore the query plan. So what was the plan? What was the plan with indexes equals 1? And I can understand how many granules it had to look up. And then there are different kind of elements of the query plan which we can expose, such as the AST, the syntax, and the estimate. So this can be good for understanding what's happening with certain queries. So that is good. And yeah, the final thing I said I would come back to is the My Queries feature. So if you're working against a particular database or on a particular project, you'll often have a number of test queries which are relevant to your particular application or system or domain. What we can do is we can put them in a folder alongside QueryDog, and when we start it, those queries are populated in this My Queries area. What I can then do is I can run these queries, and some of them will probably fail. I haven't done this for a while and the scheme has changed, but if I press Run All, it's going to run all of those queries, and we can see how long do they take, what was the average time, the fastest time, because I think you can say, I want to execute it 10 times or something like that, and take averages. So yeah, if I was to rerun it in a moment, then the averages will update. Yeah, that complete. So yeah, this one ran twice because I ran it once manually and then I pressed 1 all, and we can see that we had an average of 15, the fastest was 13 and the slowest was 17. So we can use this to performance test our own queries, and then say we go and make some tweaks to some settings or some indexes or something like that, I can then rerun my whole body of queries and understand the performance. You can drill down into these, and these are the individual runs. How long did it take? How much data did we load? And things like that. If I press Analyze Results, it will drop us back into this first screen with only the relevant queries selected, and then maybe I can do profile events and I can understand what differed across those two runs. And a typical example you might find is caching. So on the first run, the caches are cold, and then when you run it, it gets faster, and we could maybe drill down into that situation. So this My Queries screen, it turns it into a kind of test automation, performance automation tool in a way, in that I can create all of my SQL files and I can keep running them, I can make changes and improvements, and then I can understand and assess the impact of those changes. So fairly simple but fairly powerful. I use this all the time. So yeah, I think that is the highlights. We've talked through, all this kind of QueryDog screens, so I can understand exactly what's happening in terms of inserts, selects, profile events. We can group in different ways, we can filter, we can slice and dice, we can get these visualizations, and it's very kind of convenient and exploratory. We can look around the kind of database objects through various kind of tree structures and the graph view to get a feeling for the objects and how they're interrelated, and then explore, like look at a table, look at its partitions, look at its parts, look at its indexes. So very convenient from that perspective. We talked about this activity screen where I can get a live view as what's happening in terms of mergers and view refreshers and query cache and what's happening in the DDL queues. We have convenient access to log files. I can pull out errors and warnings, and I can search. So very convenient view. Cluster views to understand what's happening with Zookeeper, distribution queues, distributed DDL, and then this kind of performance testing area to understand the impact of any of your changes. So yeah, this is an open source tool. Please do download it and give it a go. If you do have any challenges with kind of ClickHouse performance, you want to optimize your cluster, or indeed if you are doing a new deployment of ClickHouse or migrating to it, then yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a freelance consultant in this area. Please check out my website, it's benjaminwootton.com, and yeah, be happy to have a chat about what you're doing with ClickHouse. So yeah, thank you very much.